What's up guys, and welcome back to another video. So this time I went on and did something very different from what we usually do. So right here we have our usual homemade controller. So I went on and bought an actual Xbox 360 controller. So lucky for me, we are running it on Windows 10 and we've got these drivers pre-installed, and I'm doing this video to see how this actually compares to the homemade controller. So once again, this is not my first time using this controller. So when I bought this, it was a few weeks ago, I think. Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. I've been using it for quite a while, and I've got some very interesting results to show you guys. So moving on, what have I exactly done with this setup? So to show you, right here we have our usual setup on Assetto Corsa for the steering, throttle, brakes and clutch and handbrake page. So this is my these are my settings for the homemade controller, not the Xbox set. So I need to show you how I configure this. So if I head over to set up USB game controllers right here, so this is where you set up you calibrate your controller, whatever that's plugged in. So the Arduino comes with its own firmware, so it self-identifies as a controller, a game controller. So I don't have to install any separate drivers. All the access and everything works as usual, and that's about the basic thing for the homemade controller. Now we already have been through the making of the controller, the tuning and coding and everything. So I just want to show you what has changed when we go over to the actual Xbox 360 controller. So we unplug that and we plug this thing in. Look at this cable. I think this is about 1.5 meters. Yeah, 1.5 meters worth of cable. Very good. So we plug this thing in and we load up the same page. Set up USB. Set up your controllers. And now we get this Xbox 360 for Windows. We go over to properties and instantly you will see a lot less buttons than what we had earlier. So earlier it showed about 32 buttons, and that's because the Arduino outputs will support 32 buttons, although the board actually handles much less. So right here we have just 10 buttons. Alright, and we've got only 3 axes. Interesting. And we've got this joystick. So what's actually going on here? So if you move the left joystick, it moves the joystick axis up and down. I'll show it this way so it's easier for you. Okay, that works. And then the left, that works. And we also got these 2 shoulders or triggers, what do you call it. So we push down on this side and push down on this side. That works. All good. And we've got this D-pad. It's an 8-direction D-pad. Works as well. And on top of these hats, we got buttons. If you press this down, that will activate buttons 9 and 10. And these 2 are here as well. And of course these 4 buttons, there's 2 here. Enable start and back. And we got the master Xbox button. Alright. So what have I noticed when I went on this thing for the first time? The build quality on this is amazing. Like these shoulder pads or triggers or whatever you call them, they are extremely smooth. Just look at that. That's just amazing. And these joysticks have a rubber cap or something on top of it. Really smooth as well. And this plastic, it's a lot more sturdy than the homemade controller. But of course, and these buttons are amazing as well, but of course there's a few downsides. These two buttons here, I don't know if you can hear them, but they creak of plastic a lot, and there's a lot of travel over here actually to get the buttons triggering, as well as these three buttons. They are pretty flimsy, if we say. Now once again, although this is meant to be an unbiased review, I made as someone who made the controller, I made my own controller, so I mean there's going to be inherent bias towards the controller by me, but I'll try my best to be unbiased about this and get over the message. And one of the other things I noticed was these joysticks, they are extremely sensitive. So I thought, is there something wrong with the joysticks or something? But then I noticed that under the calibration menu, I'll recalibrate it so I can show it to you guys. So this is the joystick, or they call it the D-pad, I don't know why. So let me show you what happens. So these are the raw data. You can see 32768, and that thing goes up to 65535 and all the way down to 0. Those are the analog values that are being output by the USB cable and are being picked up through serial data on the computer. So when for a tiny angle of change, you're going to see a very large change in the actual data that's being output. Look at that. I'm barely even moving it on the camera. And this is all it goes as far as it's to the left. So the x-axis becomes 0 way before I actually get it all the way to the left. See, now I still have a long way to go. And the same thing to the right side. So somewhere around here it maxes out. I could keep on going, but it wouldn't make any difference. So the actual range of action for these joysticks are in a much smaller angle than what's actually what the hardware we think is actually capable of. So once again, I'm not sort of trash talking about this or something, but once again, this might be a pretty genius design because it requires you just plug it in and play. It requires less calibration, or else if you wanted a very precise output of data, this might not be the one for you. So what I suspect that went wrong here is the map function. So early on the coding, we saw that a certain analog output of voltage on these joysticks are converted to a digital form on the Arduino. It takes up a certain map function. So in this case, what I think is happening is that long before it reaches a full physical range of voltage differences on this axis, the map function compresses everything and it starts limiting it. So that means it reaches a maximum level much sooner than the maximum physically possible on this joystick. And the same thing happened to the other joystick as well. See, on the X rotation, on the right side joystick, if I move it a tiny bit, it starts to max out somewhere there where I can keep going a lot more. So we're not gonna mess around with it. But then when we were making the homemade controller, we had all the controller way to code, and we could just configure it as any way as we could. So that gave us an advantage of setting the map functions correctly. and it was basically an advantage for steering in case. I'll first show you what happens with the steering on the homemade controller. See, now the steering on this is on the x-axis, and if you look closely, see, look at that. On the x-axis page, it shows a much more gradual change in the steering axis. So this is fully mapped on to what you see on the screen, and that gives us a full range of the entire movement of the axis visibly. And the same thing with vertical. There you go. Now one downside of this is the throttle and brake. So this is what I'm using for the throttle and brake. If I go full, it goes full. If I go all the way down to the brake, it goes to 0. And imagine that I pull this from the downwards position all the way till the middle, exactly middle, as I see it right now. See, there's exactly middle. But on the display, it doesn't show exactly. It doesn't center it all the way to the middle. So imagine if I put it all the way up there, and I bring it down from up the middle. See, now that's a bit higher than on the center point. So there will always be a play between the actual physical movement of the joystick versus the potentiometer inside. It's there by design, and that's to do with the construction of the on the mounting to the potentiometer. Now we don't have that disadvantage on the right side joystick, because this right side joystick is directly mounted onto the potentiometer, not through some other mechanism. So this will always self-center when you let it go. And this potentiometer has a spring inside. It's spring loaded, so if I pull it somewhere, it always self-centers. There you have it. So is it worth the money to buy an Xbox? Totally. This is an amazing controller. Apart from the little dings and dongs, it happens. But when it comes to gaming, this thing, I've been gaming with this for quite a while, and this thing feels a lot different than the homemade controller. So let me show you what exactly I'm talking about. So when I plug in my homemade controller, on the screen you can see a perfectly linear application of throttle and brake and the steering with the camera. It can use the entire potential of this right side joystick. And the thing is, it's a lot easier for me to control the car with this, because I think it's all down to personal preference. It's personally easier for me to control understeer and oversteer with this, apply instant opposite lock, and so on. So, but with the other Xbox controller, what happens is the setup on this is quite different. So I plug this in. I made a preset already, so I can show you guys. So I'll swap this over to Xbox 360. What's going on? This guy. Okay, now instantly the page is going to look different. This thing is going to be only shown up right here on the Xbox 360 left LH tag, and all of this is looking very different. The steering and FFB is on the same page, and the gearing is on the same page, and so on. And we have this we have different tabs right here, and I set this just as I thought I might like it. And there is one different thing. So there's on the main, we got all these things. So we had this earlier in the previous on the homemade control as well, but I had to choose this such that they react differently to this controller. So earlier we saw that a very tiny increase or very tiny change in direction on these joysticks will make a large movement. So that sort of hindered me driving in my normal style. So what a lot of people do here as well is they make lots of constant adjustments at varying time intervals, like full lock, and they keep on pressing it and releasing it. So that's what happens here. So I set the speed sensitivity to 20%, which means the faster you go, the lesser the steering lock becomes. And the steering filter is now at 20%. So what that means is from when you push this all the way to full lock, it will take a longer time for the steering wheel on the actual car to go to full lock. So that means it smoothens out my inputs whenever I go full lock, and that's going to help me do that full-on pulsing effect on the joystick, because driving on my usual style does not work. So once again, that entirely depends on personal choice, and sometimes you might like this thing, sometimes you might not, entirely down to personal preference. So in my case, I might actually prefer using my homemade controller over this, because I think it's just entirely down to what I've been used to all this time. It's just treating the joystick like an actual steering wheel, understeer, oversteer control, and all of that. So I tried setting down a lot of laps with this thing. It was very hard, but I think over a few months or a few weeks I'll be able to get used to this thing. So that's about it. Overall verdict, I think, well, now that only controllers are actually the cheap, I think the controllers are going to be the cheapest way to play this game out there in the market right now. So for this price, I think it's great, and it's good for learning how to control your car. But I would recommend you moving on to a much smoother form of input if you can, whenever you have whenever you're able to whenever you're able to spend on it. And of course, me presenting a problem without a solution is pointless. So as a solution, I think it's better if you try and get the Xbox One controller. Now this is an Xbox 360. The Xbox that came after that, it was the Xbox One. So try and get the One controller and see how it works on whatever the game you want to try. So I'm pretty sure they would have made a whole lot of improvements to these joysticks, how they act and so on, these triggers and whatever. So yeah, you should definitely check it out, the Xbox One controller. So there you have it. See you guys in the next video.